Sarah remembered clearly that she had been pushed into the river by Mark and Jessica, left to drown alive. She died at the hands of the childhood sweetheart. She had exhausted her family's savings and given her whole heart to support for 8 long years, alongside his beloved first love. Yet, as she opened her eyes at this moment, she saw the wooden beams so typical of the 1980s above her head. In her ears was the noisy chatter of the courtyard, along with a deeply ingrained, utterly hypocritical male voice speaking to her with gentle affection. "Sarah, I came back this time to give you a promise," he said. Mark was dressed in a crisp military uniform with brand new epaulets. Standing tall and straight, he was the most striking young man for miles around. At 22 years old, his features were handsome, and a perfectly measured, gentle smile played at the corners of his lips. The deep, earnest look in his eyes as he gazed at her had managed to fool everyone in the entire town. Today was the 16th of June, 1983. Hey guys, ever given everything for love, only to be betrayed? Today we follow Sarah, who gets a second chance after being manipulated to death. Watch her flip the script and take back her life. It was the most foolish, regretful, and fatal day of her past life. It was today that, blinded by youthful passion, she had privately pledged her life to her promising childhood friend and military officer, Mark, right in front of all their neighbors. It was today that she had personally promised him that once he returned to his unit, she would empty her family's savings, pull strings, send gifts, and pave the way to help him secure his footing and get promoted in the military. In her previous life, she had believed this was a mutual love, the perfect culmination of their childhood bond. She had foolishly thought that the affection of growing up together could outweigh all the scheming in the world. She had drained the savings her parents had accumulated from a lifetime of farming and sold all the dowries, fabrics, and jewelry she had kept since childhood. She had visited every relative and friend she could leverage, humbly begging for favors to constantly pave the way, clean up Mark's messes, and cover his financial shortfalls. Every promotion he earned, every time he solidified his position, and every moment of his immense glory was built entirely upon Sarah's blood, sweat, and family wealth. But in the end, once his position was utterly secure and his future boundless, he immediately turned on her without mercy. When his first love, Jessica, returned from the city, the two secretly resumed their romance. They viewed Sarah as a thorn in their side, feeling that a country girl like her was completely unworthy of such a distinguished military officer. They treated her years of sacrifice as nothing more than expendable stepping stones. Finally, on that rainy night, they pretended to invite her to the riverside for a heart-to-heart talk. Catching her off guard, they ruthlessly shoved her into the surging river. In the moment the freezing water swallowed her, she clearly heard Jessica's soft yet vicious voice, along with Mark's cold, heartless acquiescence. He had said, "Sarah, I'm sorry you have to suffer. Just consider it a sacrifice so we can be together. So we can be together." 8 years of sacrificing everything had bought her a demand to step aside, rewarding her with a watery grave in a freezing river. Endless hatred and biting cold swept through her entire body, making her tremble slightly. But this time, she didn't die. She had been reborn, returning to the very source of where all the tragedy began, back to the day she and he had pledged their lives to each other. Surrounded by townspeople watching the excitement, Mrs. Davis stood at the very front. Smiling kindly, she kept egging them on. "Oh my, Mark is such a loyal and affectionate boy. He went off to the army, made something of himself, and the very first thing he did was come back to find Sarah. This couple from our town is truly a match made in heaven." Another voice chimed in. "Isn't that the truth? Sarah is so lucky. They grew up together, and now that Mark has become an officer, he'll be a government man with a secure living from now on. Sarah is in for a life of luxury now." Sarah's mother, Mary, stood to the side, her face full of relief and anticipation. She quietly tugged at Sarah's sleeve and lowered her voice with joy. "Sarah, hurry up and say yes. What a wonderful match. You'll be secure and set for the rest of your life." Everyone was offering their blessings, thinking Sarah had stumbled upon the greatest fortune in the world. No one knew that this wasn't a good match. It was a deadly cage that would ruin her entire life. Mark took a half step forward and leaned in slightly, his gentle gaze locked onto her. He lowered his voice so that only the two of them could hear. His tone was exactly the kind of gentle, empty, promising she had fallen for in her past life. "Sarah, we grew up together, and you've always been the only one in my heart. When I go back to the unit this time, I have one last chance for a promotion. As long as I secure it, I'll be able to firmly put down roots in the military, settle down, and marry you." He paused, his tone becoming even more earnest as he skillfully painted the empty promises she already knew by heart. "It's just that right now, I'm lacking a few connections, and the competition in the unit is fierce. You know my family's financial situation. They can't help me much. Sarah, trust me. This time, help me get through this most difficult period. Once I get promoted, I will treat you well for the rest of my life. I'll marry you in style and never let you suffer the slightest grievance." Every word was gentle, earnest, and seemingly full of deep affection. In her previous life, Sarah had been moved to tears by these words, completely willing to go through fire and water for him, giving it her all. But now, having experienced a tragic death and seeing through all his hypocrisy and coldness, she only found it incredibly ironic. He didn't need her help to get by. He was habitually manipulating her true feelings. He was taking advantage of her family-oriented, soft-hearted, and loyal nature, and exploiting her parents' honest and agreeable disposition. He was absolutely certain that she would empty her family's savings for the sake of so-called love, just to fulfill his ambitions. All his deep affection was nothing but calculation. All his promises were nothing but exploitation. The chatter around them continued. Everyone was waiting for her to nod in agreement, waiting to see the lovers finally get married. Mark straightened up, a look of inevitable certainty in his eyes. He knew the old her far too well. He was positive she wouldn't refuse, wouldn't dare to refuse, and couldn't bear to refuse this bond they had shared since childhood. Amidst everyone's anticipation, Sarah slowly raised her head, suppressing the hatred surging in her heart. Her face showed not a trace of the shy joy from her previous life, leaving only a calm indifference. She looked at the handsome, hypocritical face before her, and spoke clearly, word by word, shattering the lively atmosphere of the crowd. "I won't help you." The short words weren't loud, but they instantly brought all the noise in the courtyard to a screeching halt. The air suddenly grew quiet. The smiles on everyone's faces instantly froze, and they looked at her in shock. The gentle smile on Mark's face stiffened as well. The certainty in his eyes instantly shattered, replaced by sheer disbelief. He froze for several seconds, as if he hadn't heard her clearly. Frowning slightly, he softly asked, "Sarah, what did you say?" Meeting his astonished gaze, she looked completely at ease, without the slightest hint of evasion. Her tone was flat but firm as she repeated, "I said, I won't help you. Your future is your own business. It has nothing to do with me." As soon as the words fell, the entire crowd was in an uproar. Mrs. Davis was the first to react, quickly taking 2 steps forward. Mrs. Davis looked at her in disbelief and tried to persuade her. "Oh, Sarah, what nonsense are you talking about, child? Mark is so successful and cares about you so much. So many girls would kill to be in your shoes. Why on earth are you pushing him away?" Mary also grew anxious. She reached out, grabbed Sarah's arm and panicked. "Sarah, are you crazy? Why are you talking such nonsense out of nowhere? Hurry up and apologize to Mark." Everyone thought Sarah had lost her mind. Instead of embracing a bright future, she was insisting on publicly embarrassing Mark. Mark's face completely darkened. His gentle disguise cracked a little, and a fleeting, imperceptible trace of anger and surprise flashed in his eyes. He had never imagined that Sarah, who had always obeyed his every word and whose eyes and heart were solely filled with him, would reject him in public. He never thought she would so decisively draw a line between them. Suppressing the displeasure in his heart, he maintained his gentle and affectionate facade as he looked at her. His tone carried a hint of grievance and probing. "Sarah, did I do something wrong to make you angry? If you feel wronged, you can tell me. Please don't throw a temper tantrum, and don't joke about my future." He was very smart. With just one sentence, he shifted all the blame onto her making. It seemed like it was her throwing a tantrum, her being unreasonable, and her blowing things out of proportion. In the past, she would have panicked and apologized, terrified of making him unhappy. But the current Sarah had long shed all her lovesick foolishness and submissive nature. She gently pulled her arm from her mother's grasp and looked calmly at Mark. Neither haughty nor humble, her tone was completely indifferent. Every word she spoke was flawless, yet every word clearly drew a boundary between them. "I'm not throwing a tantrum. Mark, we are just neighbors and friends who grew up together, nothing more. Your bright future is something you earned through your own hard work, and you should secure it yourself. My family is just an ordinary farming household. My parents work hard in the fields just to make a living, and our savings are meager. We cannot support your grand ambitions. I am also just an ordinary girl. I can't bear the responsibility of helping you get promoted and establish your career. Even less do I want to bankrupt myself and my family just for someone else's future." Her words were logical and well-founded. Her attitude was proper, no throwing fits, no acting out of spite. It was simply a calm, straightforward rejection. The expressions on the faces of the onlooking townspeople began to shift, and they no longer blindly assumed she was being unreasonable. Right, they thought, it's their family's hard-earned money. Why should they have to cough it up to pave the way for an outsider whose status isn't even officially settled yet? The gentle expression on Mark's face completely fell away. His brows furrowed tightly, and his tone took on a more oppressive weight. Sarah, you were never like this before. Does the bond we've shared all these years mean so little to you? He was starting to play the sympathy card, using their years of history to emotionally blackmail her. Sarah sneered inwardly. Years of history? It was exactly this so-called bond that had caused her family's ruin and led her to a watery grave in the freezing river in her previous life. She raised her eyes and replied indifferently. Affection is one thing, but living a life is another. They cannot be mixed up. Affection is about mutual understanding, not about one side completely bankrupting their own family to fulfill the other. It's not easy for you to strive in the military, and it's not easy for my parents and me to make a living farming at home either. Everyone has their own difficulties. We should be considerate of one another, not force others to do what is beyond their means. Every word was fair, and every word was sharply insightful, leaving Mark instantly speechless. He looked at her unfamiliar and calm demeanor, his eyes filled with confusion and reluctance. Today's Sarah was just too different. There was no shyness, no infatuation, and no compromise. From beginning to end, she was nothing but distant and clear-headed. He took a few seconds to compose himself, suppressing the shock in his heart as he tried to soften her with gentleness. Lowering his stance, he continued to paint his empty promises. Sarah, I know you feel for your family's struggles, and I understand it all. But don't worry, I will never let you sacrifice for nothing. Once I succeed in getting this promotion, I will come straight back to propose and marry you in style. After that, my salary will be stable, and I'll cover all the household expenses. You and your parents won't have to work so hard in the fields ever again. It was this exact routine, again the very same rhetoric that had deceived her for 8 whole years in her past life. Empty words from a man who had nothing, yet expected her to give him everything. She would never believe a single word of it again. She shook her head slightly, her tone remaining completely calm, utterly severing all his illusions and cutting off any remaining ties between them. No need, Mark. You should take charge of your own marriage and your own future. I can't reach the high standard of your grand ambitions, nor do I want to hold you back in life. From now on, you go your way, and I'll go mine. We will both live our own lives, completely separate from one another. These words completely ended any ambiguity and shattered all of his calculations. Mark's face instantly darkened. Every trace of gentleness vanished from his eyes, revealing the utilitarian and cold-hearted nature deep in his bones. He stared at her, his eyes carrying disbelief and a faint, simmering anger. He had probably never imagined that she, who had always been so submissive and obedient to him, would draw a line so decisively, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. The surrounding townspeople fell completely silent. No one dared to casually play matchmaker anymore, and no one dared to say how lucky she was. Mary, Sarah's mother, was so anxious that her face turned bright red. Completely at a loss, she kept pulling at Sarah's arm, wanting her to take her words back. But Sarah gently held her mother's wrist down. Looking at Mark's ashen face, Sarah felt no reluctance whatsoever. All that remained was the satisfying, freeing relief of knowing her great vengeance was beginning to unfold. In her past life, she had given everything for him, only to meet a tragic end. In this life, she had been reborn with a single thought: to cut off their past ties and never repeat the same mistakes. His path to success would never again be paved with her blood and sweat. His ambitions and schemes would never again drain her life, her family's savings, or her true heart. The trap that had imprisoned her for a lifetime ended right here today, and her new life was just beginning. By yesterday afternoon, less than half a day after she had publicly severed all ties with Mark, the news had spread throughout the entire town. In the countryside of 1983, it was incredibly scandalous for a girl to proactively reject a childhood friend who was a promising military officer. The townspeople didn't care about right or wrong. They only cared about the pros and cons. Everyone thought she had lost her mind, tossing away a golden ticket to stubbornly cling to a life of poverty. When Sarah woke up early the next morning, she could hear the intermittent sound of people gossiping outside the courtyard gate. Her mother, Mary, sat by the stove lighting the fire, her face looking terribly grim. She poked at the firewood until it crackled sharply, clearly full of anger with nowhere to vent it. Sarah knew her mother hadn't slept well all night. For one, Mary felt she had lost face, with the whole town laughing at their family. For another, she genuinely believed Sarah was just throwing a childish tantrum and had recklessly thrown away the best marriage prospect she could ever ask for. Washing her hands, Sarah helped set out the bowls and chopsticks, speaking calmly. "Mom, breakfast is ready. Let's eat first." Mary raised her eyes and glared at her, lowering her voice, frustrated by her daughter's perceived foolishness. You still have an appetite? With those few words yesterday, you completely trampled Mark's dignity. Now the whole town is gossiping behind your back, saying you're ungrateful, arrogant, and stuck up. Sarah calmly replied, I'm the one living my life. Others gossiping won't take a single grain of rice from our family. You. Mary was left speechless by Sarah's retort. She raised her hand, wanting to scold her, but ultimately couldn't bring herself to truly curse at her daughter. All that remained was a long sigh. You were so sensible when you were little. How did you become more foolish as you grew older? Mark is a military officer now. Give it a few more years. Once his rank is stable, he'll be a government man. So many girls are fighting tooth and nail to marry him, and look at what you did, you rejected him in public. Sarah understood her mother's thoughts. In Mary's understanding of the world, a stable, respectable son-in-law with a government job was the best possible destination for a daughter. Having worked hard farming her whole life, she only wanted her daughter to avoid a future of toiling with her face to the earth and her back to the sky. In her past life, Sarah had also been trapped by this worldly reasoning, compromising and making concessions step by step. But she knew better than anyone that it wasn't a safe harbor. It was a deadly shackle. She put down the bowl and chopsticks in her hand. Her tone was gentle but firm. Mom, he is successful, but his success has nothing to do with us. Didn't you hear what he meant yesterday? He wants our family to put up the money and effort to help him make connections and climb the ranks. What is our family's situation? Dad's back is bad from working in the fields all year round. The money we have saved is what you two have scrimped and saved over several years, penny by penny. It's kept for emergencies, for my dowry, and for our family's daily life. Why should we use it to pave his future? As these words landed, Mary's movements paused. She was a simple woman who cared about face and tended to follow the crowd, but deep down, what she cared about most was her family's hard-earned security. She remained silent for a long moment before muttering, but he said once he gets promoted, he will marry you and treat you well. An empty promise is worth less than a single penny in hand, Sarah pointed it out bluntly. No engagement, no bride price, no marriage contract. Just based on a few spoken words, he wants to empty our family's savings to pave his way. What if it doesn't work out in the end? Our family will lose both the person and the money. Mom, it's not worth it. Her words were practical and clear-headed. There was no spite, no willful stubbornness, only the solid truth of how to survive and manage a household. Mary completely fell silent, her brows furrowed tightly as she felt her resolve waver for the first time. Just then, steady footsteps came from outside the courtyard gate. Even without looking, Sarah knew it was Mark. He had changed into civilian clothes today. Without the eye-catching military uniform, he looked understated and modest. In reality, he had deliberately come to the house, hoping to privately manipulate her, salvage the situation, and continue pressuring her to compromise. At this very time in her past life, he had falsely lowered his head to soften her heart and make her feel guilty. In the end, she had been the one to back down, offering up the family savings to help him out. In this life, she would absolutely not repeat the same mistakes. Mark pushed the gate open and walked into the courtyard, his eyes locking onto her immediately. He deliberately softened his tone and greeted her parents respectfully. Good morning, Uncle Robert, Aunt Mary. Robert put down his farming tools. Being an honest man, even though they had lost face yesterday, he still responded politely. Mark, you're here. Have a seat. Mark didn't sit down. Standing slightly to the side in the courtyard, he kept his posture very low, appearing humble and sensible. Uncle, Aunt, I didn't come here today out of anger. Yesterday, with so many people around, and all the excitement, Sarah might have gotten a little confused and thrown a small temper tantrum, saying things she didn't mean. I have never blamed her for it. He first established a magnanimous persona for himself, pushing all the blame onto her petulance, making her parents feel embarrassed and putting her in a passive position. Immediately after, he turned to look at her, his gentle eyes carrying a precise, calculated manipulation. Sarah, when you rejected me in front of the townspeople yesterday, I know there's a high chance you were just feeling shy and afraid of being teased. I don't blame you. The bond we've shared for so many years can't be broken by just a few angry words. Watching his incredibly practiced performance, Sarah felt a chill run through her heart. It was too familiar. He was always the best at pretending to be deeply affectionate, the best at using their shared history to emotionally blackmail people. He always positioned himself as the victim, the tolerant and forgiving one, making everyone else think she was the one being unreasonable. She raised her eyes, her expression calm, refusing to take his bait or give him any opportunity to soften her resolve. I wasn't throwing a tantrum, nor was I being shy. Everything I said yesterday was from the bottom of my heart. The gentleness on Mark's face froze for a split second, a flash of astonishment darting through his eyes. but he quickly swapped it out for a look of grievance. Sarah, what exactly is wrong with you? Did I do something wrong this time? I came back to make you misunderstand? Tell me, and I'll change. He pressed her step by step, trying to expose her weaknesses and continue binding her with emotions. Her tone was light, but every word carried weight, completely blocking all his escape routes. There is no misunderstanding, Mark. You want my family to put up the money, to help you smooth out connections in the military, and aid your promotion. I am telling you explicitly that we cannot do it. My family is just an ordinary farming household. Our annual income barely feeds us. We don't have the extra money or energy to help you maneuver your future. The fierce competition and high pressure you face in the military are your difficulties, not our family's obligation. Mark hadn't expected her to be so impervious. His gentle disguise finally cracked, and his tone carried a barely noticeable hint of oppression. Sarah, we are about to get engaged. Isn't my future your future? Once I establish my footing, you'll be a military officer's dependent, living a life of luxury. Is this little bit of sacrifice really that hard for you? Here it was the most brainwashing rhetoric from her past life. When one person ascends, everyone associated with them rises too. He was using an illusory, untouchable future to exchange for a tangible, concrete present. Sarah curled her lips slightly and asked back calmly, "We aren't engaged, and we don't have a marriage contract. Why should my family pay for your future in advance? What if unforeseen variables arise later on? You'll have a bright future, while I'm left with nothing but a wild goose chase. Who will bear the consequences then?" As soon as these words came out, Robert and Mary both froze. Having lived as honest, simple folks for most of their lives, they had never considered such realistic problems. With her pointing it out so clearly, they instantly understood the risks involved. Mark was left speechless by her questioning, his eyes darkening. He hadn't expected the usually innocent and gullible Sarah to suddenly become so clear-headed, so calculating, and so capable of seeing through people's hearts. He paused for 2 seconds, suppressing the impatience in his heart, and started playing the sympathy card again, trying to move her parents. "Uncle, Aunt, Sarah and I grew up together. Our bond goes deeper than anyone else's. This promotion is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. As long as I can make it through this, I will definitely treat Sarah well in the future, be filial to you both, and never let you down. Right now, I'm just short of a little money to help grease the wheels. It's not much, just a few $100s. Once my rank is officially settled and my salary doubles, I will immediately pay the family back double." A few $100s in the 1980s was an astronomical figure for an ordinary farming household. It was the hard-earned blood, sweat, and tears that her parents had accumulated over 3 or 4 years of waking up at the crack of dawn, toiling in the fields, and raising pigs. In her past life, she had been entirely deceived by his promise of paying her back double and his bright future, secretly taking the bankbook from the cabinet at home and withdrawing every last cent of their savings. Looking into his confident eyes, Sarah knew exactly what he was thinking. He was certain that she was soft-hearted, certain that her parents were easy to talk to, and certain that she couldn't bear to throw away their years of shared history. He was absolutely positive she would eventually compromise. Unfortunately for him, times had changed. Without waiting for her parents to speak, she preemptively rejected him, her attitude resolute and leaving no room for negotiation. No need. When it comes to borrowing money, even blood brothers need to keep clear accounts, let alone us, who merely share a neighborly bond. If you need funds to tide you over, you can ask your own parents and relatives for help. Our family's money must be kept for household expenses and emergencies. We won't lend it out, and we certainly won't use it to help someone maneuver their career path. Mark's face turned completely cold. His gentleness vanished entirely, revealing the calculation and displeasure of a true opportunist. "Sarah, are you really this heartless? For just a few $100s, you're going to sever over a decade of our bond? It's not that I'm heartless, it's that you're demanding the impossible." She looked straight at him, neither haughty nor humble. "A bond means mutual support, not one-sided extortion. If you truly cared about our history, you wouldn't force an ordinary farming family to give everything they have just to pay for your ambitions." These words completely struck his nerve. All his disguises, all his deep affection essentially, all just tools for his own ambition, had been publicly torn away by her. Unable to keep up the act any longer, his tone grew several degrees colder. "So you are dead set on not helping me at all?" "Yes," she replied bluntly. "I can't help you, and I won't." The atmosphere in the courtyard instantly froze to the extreme. Looking at the stalemate between the two, Mary was caught in the middle. She wanted to persuade Sarah, but had been deterred by the harsh reality of her daughter's recent words, leaving her standing there helplessly. Robert finally spoke up. His tone was steady, carrying the heavy weight of a firm boundary. "Mark, it's not that we are being unreasonable. The family truly isn't well off. We rely on the weather for our crops and can't save much year after year. We really can't come up with extra money to help you secure connections. We are truly powerless to help with your situation." With her father's words, Sarah's position was completely secured. Mark, looking at the unified stance of their family of 3, finally understood that no matter how much he played the victim or used the sympathy card today, he would not be able to wring even the slightest benefit out of her. A hint of gloom flashed in his eyes. He was already harboring deep resentment against her. He knew that losing her family's financial support would inevitably make his path to promotion much more difficult this time. He stayed silent for a long time before finally pulling his lips into a cold smile. "Fine. Very good, Sarah. I will remember this." These words were no longer gentle, carrying naked threats and resentment. After speaking, he didn't linger any longer. He turned and strode out of the courtyard, his back looking resolute, without a single trace of the warmth he used to show. Watching his retreating figure, Sarah felt absolutely no turbulence in her heart. She knew his personality too well. By cutting off his support system today, he wouldn't reflect on himself. He would only blame all his misfortunes on her. He would resent her, hate her, and inevitably try to find ways to make trouble for her in the future. But she wasn't afraid at all. In her previous life, she had accommodated him in everything, making concessions at every turn, only to be rewarded with a watery grave and a freezing river. In this life, she would not yield a single inch. By holding her bottom line, even the worst possible outcome would be better than the eternal damnation of her past life. After Mark left, Mary finally couldn't help but speak up. "Sarah, weren't you a bit too harsh just now? You've offended him so thoroughly. The townspeople are going to gossip even more from now on." Sarah turned to look at her mother, her tone gentle yet firm. "Mom, gossip is only temporary, but our livelihood is for a lifetime. If I had relented today and taken out our family savings to help him, and something went wrong later, years of our savings would go down the drain. When that happens, no one will sympathize with us. They will only laugh at us for being fools. I would rather people call me ungrateful than watch our family's hard-earned blood and sweat money be freely used to pave someone else's way." Robert nodded heavily and chimed in. "Sarah is right. We must act within our means in everything we do, and more importantly, we have to protect our family's foundation. Favors and marriages bought by emptying our own pockets won't last long anyway." Her father's approval completely stabilized the situation at home. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief in her heart. The first step was publicly rejecting the marriage and severing their emotional ties. The second step was fiercely guarding the family's savings and cutting off his financial support. Having executed both moves flawlessly, she had completely extinguished the spark that ignited the tragedy of her past life. However, she knew this was far from enough. Mark's ambition was immense, and he would never easily give up on a source of help that was so readily available. Backing down temporarily was just a stalling tactic. It wouldn't be long before he made a comeback. Even his beloved first love, who had been hiding out in the county town, was about to return. The real tug-of-war and scheming had only just begun. But she was already fully prepared, and she would never let herself be slaughtered again. In the blink of an eye, 7 days had passed since Mark hit a wall at their house. The gossip in town hadn't stopped, but the direction of the rumors had quietly shifted. At first, everyone said she was willful and unappreciative. But since Mark had never again stepped foot in their courtyard, many people slowly began to put the pieces together, secretly speculating that there was more to the story. Sarah didn't waste her energy arguing against the rumors. Every day, she followed her father to the fields to tend to the crops. When she had free time, she organized the storehouse at home, taking inventory of the grain and fabric, firmly guarding all the family's savings and supplies. She knew in her heart that Mark would not just let things go. Having lost her family's financial support, his path to promotion was blocked, and he would inevitably seek another way. And the person she was waiting for arrived right on schedule. In the afternoon, a different kind of commotion came from the town entrance. Many townspeople poked their heads out to look. From a distance, Sarah saw a slender girl walking down the dirt road. She was wearing a well-tailored light blue Dacron blousia fabric rarely seen in the countryside. It was Jessica. At this point in her past life, Jessica had returned under the guise of visiting relatives. On the surface, she was gentle and kind, exchanging pleasantries with everyone around. But secretly, she constantly passed messages to Mark. The two mutually affirmed their feelings, and step by step began to view Sarah as an obstacle. Jessica deeply understood the mindset of country folk and knew exactly how to play the part of an innocent, kind-hearted intellectual, easily winning everyone's favor. Jessica gently chatted with people along the way, heading straight for Sarah's courtyard. Wearing a perfectly measured faint smile, she saw Sarah drying fabric in the yard and took the initiative to greet her. "Sarah, long time no see." Sarah put down the bamboo pole in her hands. Her expression was calm, without the slightest hint of surprise, treating her just like any ordinary townsperson. "Jessica, back visiting family?" Jessica walked slowly into the courtyard, her gaze quietly sweeping over the scene inside the yard without showing any emotion. "Yes, my elders at home were missing me, so I specifically came back to stay for a while." She then spoke in a soft voice. "Just now on the road, I heard quite a few people talking about you and Mark. I was worried about you, so I came over to check in." The moment she opened her mouth, she steered the topic toward Mark, laying the groundwork flawlessly. Hearing the voices, Mary walked out of the house. Seeing Jessica, she quickly and warmly greeted her. "Oh, Jessica is here. Hurry inside and take a seat. I'll go pour you a glass of cold water." "Aunt Mary, please don't trouble yourself. I'll just sit for a moment and then go." Jessica declined with a smile. She turned her head back to look at Sarah, her tone carrying a hint of persuasion. "Sarah, Mark might seem strong-willed on the outside, but deep down, he values loyalty and affection very much. You two grew up together. Don't let over a decade of history be completely ruined over a momentary argument." Here it was again, the exact same rhetoric. First, taking the stance of a bystander and putting on a fair and impartial facade, while subtly shifting the blame for the entire conflict onto Sarah, making her seem too stubborn. In her past life, Sarah had been deceived by Jessica's gentle exterior, actually believing that she sincerely wanted her and Mark to get along. Sarah had bared her heart and poured out all her troubles to her. Who knew that the moment she turned around, every heartfelt word would reach Mark's ears and become ammunition to attack her? Sarah's fingertips gently brushed the edge of the fabric, her tone flat and emotionless. "When people interact, it has to be mutual. You can't force things." Jessica frowned slightly, putting on a confused expression. "I really don't understand. Mark is in the military now, and his future is bright. So many people are hoping to marry him. That day, everyone in town saw with their own eyes that you publicly rejected him. If it was just a small misunderstanding, you could sit down and talk it out properly. You can always find a compromise that works for both of you. A compromise doesn't necessarily exist." Sarah raised her eyes and looked directly at her. Her demeanor was perfectly measured, not sharp, but guarded on all fronts. "He has the future he wants to pursue, which requires money and connections to pave the way. But my family's resources are limited. We truly cannot make that happen for him. Rather than forcing a tangled mess, it's better to make things clear early on so we don't end up resenting each other later." A fleeting, imperceptible hint of surprise flashed through Jessica's eyes. She had anticipated that Sarah would be resistant or annoyed, but she hadn't expected her to be so clear-headed, completely refusing to let Jessica control the pace of the conversation. After a brief moment of astonishment, she quickly adjusted her expression, maintaining her delicate and kind facade. "You can't say that. If two people truly intend to be together, they should naturally support each other. Mark mentioned to me that this promotion opportunity is incredibly rare, and he's just lacking a little outside help. If he gets through this hurdle, his life will be secure in the future, and naturally, he won't treat you poorly." Sarah sneered inwardly. She spoke of support so lightly, but it just meant Sarah unilaterally emptying her family's savings and bearing all the risks. This so-called secure future was nothing but an empty promise that could never be cashed in. If he succeeded, all the credit would go to Mark. If he failed, Sarah's family would bear all the losses alone. "Jessica, you've lived in the county town for years. Perhaps you don't quite understand the hardships of a farming household." Sarah spoke slowly, her logic clear and ordered. "Our harvest depends entirely on the weather. The savings at home are what my parents have scrimped and saved over many years, meant for medical emergencies. Taking our entire family's foundation to gamble on someone else's future is too big of a risk. My parents can't afford it." Jessica gently pursed her lips, attempting to continue her persuasion. "But surely over a decade of shared history is worth more than mere money? Affection is one thing, and livelihood is another. They cannot be mixed up," she replied, her tone remaining calm. "A person who truly values a relationship wouldn't force a friend from an ordinary background to give everything they have to pay for his ambitions." These words fell on Jessica's ears, leaving her momentarily at a loss for a suitable rebuttal. She had not expected that the usually docile Sarah would be so clear-headed and insightful in her speech, giving her absolutely no opportunity for moral manipulation. Listening from the side, Mary gradually realized something was wrong. From beginning to end, Jessica had been persuading Sarah to put up the money to help Mark. Every sentence was biased toward Mark, without the slightest consideration for their family's situation. Mary had originally held a rather good impression of Jessica, but at that moment, a quiet rift formed in her heart. After a brief silence, Jessica quickly changed her strategy. Putting on a look of grievance, she said, I just genuinely didn't want to see your years of friendship shatter over this. I didn't have any other intentions. Perhaps I was inconsiderate and spoke out of turn. Sarah, please don't take it to heart. She took the initiative to show weakness, framing herself as someone whose good intentions were simply misunderstood. An ordinary girl would inevitably feel guilty and step up to ease the tension. But Sarah wouldn't fall for the trap. She merely gave a faint nod. I understand your good intentions. It's just that my mind is made up on this matter, and it will not change. Just then, footsteps sounded from outside the courtyard gate. Mark appeared. It seemed that before Jessica had paid her visit, she had already sent a message ahead to arrange a meeting here. His gaze first fell on Jessica, carrying a barely perceptible softness, before turning to Sarah, his expression instantly growing cold again. Jessica, why are you here? He asked. Jessica turned around and replied softly. I heard you and Sarah had a falling out. I thought I'd come over and try to mediate between you two. Unfortunately, I couldn't persuade Sarah. With one simple sentence, she seamlessly pinned the blame on Sarah's refusal to back down. Mark looked at Sarah, his tone carrying a suppressed anger. Sarah, Jessica kindly tried to mediate, yet you still refused to yield. In your eyes, does money always come before our bond? It's not about money coming first, it's our bottom line, and we cannot afford to lose it, she replied, neither haughty nor humble. I have repeated it many times. My family does not have the means to help you secure connections. Rather than arguing over and over, it would be better for you to just accept reality. Mark's brows furrowed tightly, and he wanted to continue pressuring her, but Jessica gently pulled on his arm and softly urged, Mark, there's no need to rush. Sarah is just having a hard time wrapping her head around it right now. Let's not push her too hard. Give her some time to think it over slowly. It seemed like mediation, but it was actually a deliberate attempt to create an impression that it wasn't him making unreasonable demands, but rather her being stubbornly unreasonable. Sarah watched coldly from the sidelines, taking in the subtle, unspoken harmony as the two played off each other flawlessly. In her past life, she had been blind to it for far too long, always assuming they were just casually interacting as ordinary folks from the same town. Now that she had stepped out of the blinding maze of love, so many details were glaringly obvious. There's no need to wait, because I won't change my mind, she said, bluntly shattering their hopes. Don't bother sending anyone else here to persuade me in the future. It's completely futile. We are walking our own separate paths now, so there's no need to disturb one another anymore. Mark's face darkened completely. He finally realized that no matter what method he used to persuade her, or who he found to mediate, she would never compromise. Without the support of her family, the difficulty of his promotion this time would increase exponentially. The resentment accumulating in Mark's heart grew even heavier. Seeing that the situation could not be salvaged, Jessica stopped trying to mediate. She stood up gently to say her goodbyes. Since that's the case, I won't stay any longer. Sarah, if you ever think things through, there is still room for discussion. Mark, let's go. The two walked out side by side. After they had walked a distance away from the courtyard, Sarah stood inside, faintly hearing Jessica speaking to Mark in a low voice. The distance was too far to hear the exact details, but she could still feel the tight, undeniable bond between them. Once they were far away, Mary walked up to her daughter and spoke in a low voice. To be honest, listening to what Jessica said just now, the more I think about it, the more I feel something isn't right. She was siding with Mark the whole time, without the slightest consideration for our family's difficulties. Sarah turned to look at her mother and said slowly, You can never truly know what's in someone's heart. Many people look kind on the surface, but are secretly scheming in their heads. We can only rely on ourselves for everything. We can't pin our hopes on others suddenly growing a conscience. I understand, Mary sighed deeply. It's just that Mark won't give up easily. I'm afraid there will be plenty of trouble knocking on our door in the future. Sarah was already prepared. She knew very well in her heart that this clash was only her first confrontation with Jessica. The woman wouldn't just stop here. She would think of other ways to stir up trouble and force Sarah to back down in the future. Mark was desperate to seize his promotion opportunity, and without her family's financial support, he would easily be swayed by Jessica's ideas. The two of them calculated against each other while simultaneously depending on each other. It wouldn't be long before the cracks between them slowly began to show. But Sarah couldn't just passively wait for trouble to find her. Protecting the family savings was only the first step. She needed to take advantage of the currently relaxing economic environment to find a suitable side business and build up her own foundation. Only with financial independence could she completely shake off the control of others and take charge of her own future. In her past life, she had pinned all her hopes on someone else, only to meet a tragic end. In this life, She only believed in the security she earned with her own two hands. After Jessica's failed attempt at persuasion, Mark didn't just let things go. For the next few days, he kept finding all sorts of excuses to run back to the town. Sometimes he would squat at the town entrance waiting for Sarah to come home from the fields. Other times he would walk straight to the outside of her courtyard gate, putting on a show of waiting patiently. He exploited the countryside's emphasis on saving face, trying to use a prolonged entanglement to force her to yield. He wanted the neighbors to continuously come over and persuade her, layering the pressure to push her into an increasingly awkward position. One evening, when the sun had mostly set, Sarah finished putting away her farming tools and had just stepped through the courtyard gate when a familiar voice came from behind her. "Sarah, wait a moment." Mark quickly caught up. He was still wearing civilian clothes. His face had lost its previous edge, replaced by a tired and desolate expression, deliberately creating the appearance of someone suffering bitterly. Sarah stopped in her tracks. She didn't turn around to greet him, but merely turned sideways, keeping her distance. "Is there something else? I want to have a few words with you alone." He glanced into the courtyard. After confirming that Robert and Mary were still in the back room tidying things up, he lowered his voice a few notches. "I've thought it over repeatedly these past few days. Perhaps I was too impatient before, speaking without considering your difficulties." Sarah had long expected this display of weakness. When a head-on collision failed to force her to compromise, he had changed his strategy, first using concessions to win sympathy. Sarah replied calmly, "If you have something to say, just say it straight." Mark took 2 steps closer, his eyes carrying a deliberately brewed earnestness. "You should know how rare this promotion opportunity is. If I miss it this time, who knows how many years it will take to wait for the exact same chance again. I know it's truly difficult to ask you to take out your family's savings. We can discuss this. You don't have to get it all at once. Just help with as much as you can. No matter the amount, once I secure my footing, I will definitely return it in full, and I'll even compensate you extra." It was the same old story in a different guise, just with a softer tone in an attempt to lower her guard. She gently shook her head, her attitude not wavering in the slightest. "Mark, the problem isn't the amount. It's that this matter itself simply won't work. The family's savings have a fixed purpose and cannot be casually moved around for personal favors. I cannot risk my family's security. In your eyes, are our years of history not even worth taking a little risk?" His brows drew together, his tone tinged with grievance. "Everyone says you are smart and insightful. Why must you get stuck on this one thing and refuse to be flexible? If I can smoothly get promoted, your life will only get better and better in the future." The future could not be verified, but the risks right in front of them were very real. She remained clear and logical, completely unmoved by his emotions. "Without a written guarantee in black and white, oral promises mean nothing. I have no right to take the blood and sweat money my parents accumulated through hard labor and gamble it on a future with no visible results." Looking at the impervious Sarah, the impatience Mark had been suppressing for so long slowly floated to the surface. "So, no matter how much I concede, you still refuse to yield?" "Yes," she answered crisply. "There is no room for discussion on this matter." He stayed silent for a moment before his tone suddenly grew several degrees colder, faintly carrying the implication of moral blackmail. "Sarah, with you being so resolute, others will only think you're heartless. The gossip in the town is getting uglier and uglier. If you keep acting like this, finding a suitable marriage in the future will be incredibly difficult." This was his final bargaining chip, using the reputation that a country girl valued most to pressure her. Her heart felt no turbulence whatsoever. In her past life, she had cared too much about others' evaluations, constantly wronging herself to cater to outsiders' opinions, and ultimately ended up in that miserable state. In this life, she had long understood that respectability bought through compromise was ultimately fragile and unbearable. A person's life was ultimately their own to live. Other people's gossip couldn't provide 3 meals a day and a roof over their head all year round. If a relationship requires me to empty my family's savings and wrong myself just to maintain it, then I'd rather not have it. Whether my reputation is good or bad, it ultimately cannot compare to my family living a secure life." Her answer completely blocked all his avenues of pressure. Mark stared at her, his eyes complex and willing, angry, and containing a trace of unconcealable surprise. He had known her for over a decade, and had never seen her looking so calm and distant. It was as if the girl who used to prioritize him in everything had been completely replaced by someone else. Amidst the stalemate, Mary walked out from the back room. Seeing the scene in the courtyard, she stopped in her tracks. She could tell the atmosphere between the two was tense. After a moment of hesitation, she finally spoke up to smooth things over. "Mark, it's not that we are intentionally making things difficult for you. Sarah has already explained the family's difficulties clearly. We truly are powerless to help with this matter. With an elder speaking up, Mark knew he wouldn't be able to achieve his goal today either. Any further entanglement would only make him seem unreasonable and pestering. He took a deep breath and forced a stiff smile. Fine, I understand. I won't come to pressure you anymore. Despite his words, the resentment in his tone was glaringly obvious. He didn't linger any longer. Turning around, he walked away with heavy steps, looking as if he had suffered some massive injustice. Once Mark had walked far enough away, Mary stepped up to Sarah's side, her face full of worry. Look at the way he was acting. I'm afraid he's harboring a grudge now. What if he goes out there and talks nonsense, ruining your reputation? Let people say what they want, Sarah said, comforting her mother. We don't owe him anything, and we have a clear conscience. Over time, everyone will eventually be able to tell right from wrong. Rather than constantly backing down out of fear of gossip, it's better to hold our bottom line. After this incident, Sarah became even more certain that she couldn't remain trapped on this land, waiting passively. Relying solely on farming could only barely keep them fed and clothed. If she wanted to have true security and confidence, she had to find a side business. Drawing on the memories of her past life, she knew that the market environment was about to gradually loosen up, and handmade knitwear would sell incredibly well in the county town. She discussed it carefully with her parents, planning to use her free time to knit woolen shoes, socks, and scarves. She would then ask familiar townspeople who were heading into the county for the market to take the items to the vendors near the transit agency to sell on consignment. Robert initially had his misgivings, worrying that policies might tighten and that doing small business could stir up trouble. Sarah slowly reasoned with him, explaining that nowadays, many folks in the towns and villages were doing a little business during market days. As long as they kept their heads down and earned money through honest craftsmanship, there wouldn't be any problems. After several rounds of persuasion, her parents finally relented and took out a small portion of their spare money to let her buy yarn and knitting needles. For the next period of time, Sarah toiled in the fields during the day and knitted under the lamplight at night. Her fingertips were often rubbed red and raw by the knitting needles, but as she looked at the slowly piling finished products, her heart felt increasingly at ease. The income from every knitted item was carefully collected and stored separately by her, absolutely never mixed in with the family's emergency funds. She deliberately avoided any routes where she might bump into Mark. If she saw him from a distance on the road, she would proactively take a detour, refusing to give him any opportunity to come up and pester her. Many enthusiastic elders in town still came to their door to persuade her, mostly spurred on by Mark or nosy neighbors like Mrs. Davis. Faced with their persuasion, Sarah consistently maintained a peaceful attitude. She repeatedly explained her difficulties, neither arguing with anyone nor ever relenting to change her decision. As this happened more and more, the people coming to persuade her gradually dwindled. She would only occasionally catch fragments of news. Having lost her family's financial backing, Mark repeatedly hit dead ends when trying to pull strings for his promotion, falling to a severe disadvantage in the military's internal competition. He was also frequently meeting with Jessica, who was still visiting the town. The two often headed into the township together, a sight many villagers had witnessed with their own eyes. Someone chatted with Sarah privately, their words carrying a probing tone. I heard Mark has been spending a lot of time with that Jessica girl who came back from the county. Sarah, do you really not care at all? Sarah merely gave a faint smile. We cut ties long ago. Whoever he associates with is his own business. Her calm and open attitude completely choked up the person asking, making it impossible for them to continue prying. Sarah knew very well in her heart that while Mark and Jessica appeared to rely on each other on the surface, underneath, they each had their own ulterior motives. Mark wanted to use the ready-made network of Jessica's relatives and friends in the county town, while Jessica had her eye on Mark's status as a military officer. Once they could no longer extract their desired benefits from one another, their fragile alliance would quickly shatter. The closer they were now, the uglier it would be when they eventually turned on each other. She had no intention of interfering in any of their entanglements. She wouldn't proactively spread rumors, nor would she deliberately kick them when they were down. All of her energy was entirely focused on her handiwork and her livelihood. In just 2 short months, her consigned knitwear consistently sold out. She had saved up her very first complete sum of independent income. Clenching this money she had earned with her own 2 hands, Sarah truly felt an unprecedented sense of security. She didn't have to rely on anyone, didn't have to compromise herself to please others, and didn't have to pin her hopes on illusory promises. In her past life, she had placed all her hopes on Mark, giving everything she had, only to end up with nothing. In this life, she relied on her own craftsmanship to make a living, steadily accumulating her own foundation. The entanglement and scheming belonged to them, while she only strode toward her own future. Of course, she didn't let her guard down. Mark's ambition was incredibly strong. Under the frustration of his hindered promotion, there was no guarantee he wouldn't harbor dark thoughts and come up with other ways to disrupt her life. She made full preparations, quietly waiting for the dust to settle. Good and evil would eventually find their rightful places, and the ending that belonged to them was slowly arriving. Winter quietly arrived, and the farm work in the fields gradually became less demanding. The sales for the knitted items she had accumulated grew steadily more stable. By continuously sending goods to the county town, the savings safely stored under her own name increased day by day. Clenching this tangible income in her hands, her heart felt grounded and secure. During this period, she rarely heard news about Mark, only occasionally catching fragmented updates from the villagers' casual chats. She heard that after returning to his unit, lacking the funds and connections to pave his way, the promotion quota that had been within his reach fell into someone else's hands. With his extremely high ego, he found it difficult to accept the disparity, and his behavior became increasingly erratic. Outside of training, he frequently asked people for favors and ran around trying to make connections, expending a lot of energy with very little to show for it. Everyone also said that Jessica didn't stay long in the countryside. After returning to the county town, she still frequently exchanged letters with Mark. Mark was entirely pinning his hopes on relying on Jessica's family connections to turn the tide. He continuously sent supplies and gifts to the county town, exhausting his efforts to maintain this relationship. When the townspeople chatted, they often sighed, saying that if Sarah had been willing to lend a helping hand back then, Mark would be enjoying great glory now. Many people still secretly felt that she had been too stubborn. Hearing this, Sarah just laughed it off, focusing on organizing the knitted goods waiting to be shipped. Others couldn't see the harsh reality hidden beneath the surface, but she knew it perfectly well. The alliance between those two was built entirely on mutual benefits, and its foundation was already crumbling. The unforeseen change came much faster than expected. In the middle of December, someone from the township brought news. The military had sent investigators down to look into Mark. The cause of the matter wasn't complicated. Desperate for a promotion, Mark had secretly asked people to send gifts and clear the way with connections. The relevant letters and exchanged goods had left traces, and his competitors seized this evidence to report him to his superiors. The military had strict discipline and absolutely did not tolerate opportunistic and corrupt practices. An investigation team was directly stationed to verify the facts. When the news made its way back to the town, the whole village was in an uproar. Mrs. Davis hurriedly ran into Sarah's courtyard, her tone carrying sheer disbelief. "Sarah, did you hear? Something happened to Mark. The military is investigating him. He might not even be able to keep his current position." Hearing this, Mary froze in place, instinctively looking at her daughter, with a complex expression. Sarah stopped the knitting needles in her hands, her expression completely calm. "He chose his own path, so naturally, he has to bear the consequences himself. If you had just been willing to take out the money to help him back then, how would he have ended up in this situation?" Mrs. Davis couldn't help but sigh. Even if he had been lucky enough to succeed this time, continuing to climb the ranks in the future would still require constant investment. It would be a bottomless pit of demands that our family simply cannot afford to fill. Sarah spoke slowly, her tone completely devoid of gloating, merely stating facts. A future built on a path paved with money is never secure to begin with. Mrs. Davis opened her mouth, unable to find words to refute her. She fortunately left the courtyard. A few days later, Mark, who had taken leave to return home, appeared at the town entrance. His formerly tall, straight, and spirited appearance was completely gone. His eyes were bloodshot, and his face was haggard and gloomy. The very first thing he did was head to the county town to find Jessica, hoping her family would step in to mediate on his behalf. But Jessica's attitude had completely changed. When the Jessica family learned that Mark was involved in a disciplinary investigation, had no hope of promotion, and was highly likely to be penalized, they refused to be dragged down with him and immediately blocked the two from interacting. After weighing the pros and cons, Jessica was unwilling to continue expending her energy supporting a military officer with no visible future. She simply closed her doors and refused to see him, asking someone to return all the items Mark had previously gifted her, severing all ties. With all his illusions completely shattered, the emotions Mark had suppressed for so long finally exploded. He argued and caused a scene outside Jessica's house, attracting many onlookers. The inside story of their mutual calculations and transactional dealings slowly leaked out through their arguments. This matter quickly spread throughout the county town and made its way back to the countryside via the flow of people going to the market. Only then did everyone slowly come to their senses, clearly seeing the scheming hidden beneath the so-called affection between the two of them. Unresigned to his fate, Mark tossed and turned, eventually returning to the town and rushing straight to Sarah's door. He carried a chill about him, his eyes gloomy as he stood at the courtyard gate, staring fixedly at her. "Sarah, if you had just been willing to help me back then, I wouldn't have ended up in this situation." His words were full of displaced anger. Even now, he was unwilling to admit that his own impatience for quick success and excessive ambition were what caused this disaster. Instead, he blamed all his misfortune on her initial refusal. Sarah stood up and steadied herself, looking at him from a distance, her tone indifferent. "The path is beneath your own feet, and you made your own choices. You shouldn't blame the outcome on others. I made it very clear from the beginning. I have no obligation to bankrupt my entire family to fulfill your ambitions." "Ambitions?" Mark repeated the word in a low voice, his chest heaving. "I worked hard just to have a better life. Is that a crime? If you had considered our years of history and reached out a hand to pull me up, everything would be different. True affection doesn't force others to sacrifice their whole family's security to fulfill oneself," she replied slowly, unhurried and unbothered. "If you want to climb higher, you should rely on your own honest hard work, rather than trying to rely on other people's money and favors to take shortcuts. If you take too many shortcuts, sooner or later, you'll step on thin air." These words struck his deepest humiliation. He opened his mouth to argue, but found no way to refute her. He knew what she said was right, he just hadn't wanted to face reality for a long, long time. Robert walked out from inside the house and stood beside his daughter, his attitude steady. "Mark, things have already come to this, and saying more is useless. Reflect carefully on yourself, live honestly from now on, and don't come bothering Sarah anymore. You two are walking separate paths now." Looking at her family's guarded and distant appearance, Mark finally understood that he no longer had any chance of forcing her to compromise. He gave a miserable smile, full of bitterness and unwillingness. Without arguing any further, he turned around and left in silence. Not long after, the official disciplinary notice came down. Mark received a disciplinary punishment and lost his chance to continue developing in the military. He had no choice but to be discharged early and return to his hometown. The military officer, who was once the envy of everyone for miles around, ended up with a ruined reputation. After returning to his hometown, Mark lived a depressed and joyless life. When others mentioned him, there were mostly only sighs of pity left, and he no longer received the flattery of the past. He also asked matchmakers to look for potential brides everywhere, but most families who knew about his past scandals were completely unwilling to agree to a marriage. Jessica remained in the county town and found a stable job through her family's arrangements. However, because her reputation had been damaged by the previous storm, she faced restrictions everywhere when choosing a marriage prospect and could never find a satisfactory match. The two completely cut ties. The alliance that had once relied on each other ultimately ended up in mutual resentment. Time slowly moved forward. Sarah continued to run her knitting side business. After accumulating enough capital, she reached a long-term cooperation agreement with a familiar merchant, and her income rose steadily. She used the money she earned to subsidize the household expenses, help her parents repair their house, and purchase various household items. Her family no longer had to live on a tight budget. The number of people coming to propose marriage gradually increased, but she did not rush to choose a partner. Having experienced the catastrophe of her past life, she no longer pinned her life on marriage. She let nature take its course, prioritizing living a rich, free, and comfortable life for herself first. In her spare time, she would still work in the fields, looking after the family's farmland. She woke up to watch the morning mist and greeted the evening breeze at dusk. She no longer had to walk on eggshells, trying to figure out other people's thoughts, no longer had to bankrupt her family to please anyone, and no longer had to be trapped in a cage of love woven by others. Occasionally, when passing by the riverside and seeing the slowly flowing water, she would still remember the freezing, bone-piercing sense of suffocation from her past life. That tragedy constantly reminded her that by relying on others, one could never control their own destiny. In her past life, she had given everything for a fake romance, reducing herself to a stepping stone for others to climb up, and ultimately died with bitter regrets buried in a freezing river. In this life, she had turned back in time at the crossroads of fate, severing vain entanglements, protecting her family's blood and sweat, and relying on her own two hands to make a living. Step by step, she walked out onto a broad, clear path that belonged entirely to her. Some people received opportunities but didn't know how to be content, anxiously scheming for a lifetime, only to end up with absolutely nothing to show for it. Others stayed clear-headed, guarded their true hearts and moved forward steadily with their feet firmly planted on the ground, ultimately able to embrace a secure and peaceful rest of their lives. All things in the world have their own karma and destined conclusions. In the long years to come, Sarah only wished to protect her family well, make an honest living, live each day following her heart, and never let herself down.
Ending, Sarah proves that real love never demands your family's savings. Empty promises mean nothing. Your best safety net is financial independence and knowing when to say no. Own your destiny.